next on Bronco Tales.
Like you said, integrating all of these things together so that students have a different skill set. They can shift into these different roles, because one of the great things about an MSW degree is that it's so flexible. You can do so many different things with the MSW degree.
My name is Jacoba Rock, and I'm a clinical faculty member at Boise State School of Social Work. The focus of my practice and research is on social work and criminal legal settings. I'm grateful to be the host of today's College of Health Sciences Bronco Tales podcast with our school's new Divisional Dean, Dr. David Becerra. Dr. Becerra begins his new role this summer, 2023, leading the School of Social Work's degree programs, faculty, and staff. Today's podcast episode will introduce Dr. Becerra to the Boise State community as an opportunity for us to learn about his interests and goals in his new position. We will talk about contemporary social work and social work education, as well as Dr. Becerra's specific goal of improving access and opportunities for students and communities. This is Bronco Tales with College of Health Sciences. All right, can you tell us some about where you're from and how you became a social worker?
I am originally from San Isidro, California, which is a border city that borders Tijuana, Mexico. So it's literally the last city that you in the United States before you cross into Mexico. So I was born and raised there. So there's the concept of immigration and the border has always been present in my life. The evolution to social work is a long journey. I never thought I would ever be a social worker. That never entered my mind at all. I didn't even know I was going to go to college. So thinking about those types of things, my mom had always encouraged me to do well in school, but being an immigrant herself, she didn't understand the U.S. school system. So I was an okay student, but not a great student. She, again, encouraged me to do as well as I could. But I was fortunate enough to have teachers who really took an interest in me and motivated me to do better than I was doing. And so because of that, they inspired me to be a teacher. So that's what when I finally figured out what I wanted to do in life, I wanted to be a teacher. And I think that's why education is still so important to me because of my kind of journey. So I went to school. I went to Arizona State got my undergraduate degree in education, and then I was a high school history teacher. So what I wanted to do was do the same thing for other students that my teachers did for me, and to help motivate them and kind of guide them and support them through the process. But over time, you get frustrated, like I think a lot of teachers do, with administration and different restrictions about what you can and can't do. And so, and then also I realized, in high school, you have several classes with at least, 25 to 30 students. So you have more than 100 students every day. It becomes really difficult to have individualized one-on-one attention and give them the support that they need. So I would work a lot with the school social worker to get them to get the resources that they needed and the support that they needed. And eventually, when talking to the school social worker, I was like, you know what, you should become a social worker because that's how you're really going to be able to help and work with these students. And so that got me thinking, and eventually I did go to get my master's in social work, again at Arizona State University. And so that's how the journey to become a social worker started, was my wanting to be a teacher because of how the teachers helped me, because I definitely wouldn't have been able to accomplish anything if it wasn't for those teachers who took an interest in me, because most of the teachers I had expressed no interest at all and just were fine with me being a C student or whatever, and just continuing on. So, lots of different experiences going through school where you encounter teachers who don't believe in you. And even when I had made the shift that, okay, I'm going to apply myself and do really well in school and do everything that I can, you still have teachers so then when my grades started to improve, they didn't see that as a positive thing. They saw it as like, oh, you must be cheating because you went from a C student to now an A student. So there's something wrong, instead of thinking like, oh, we're proud of you that you're making this shift. So again, I wanted to try to go back to school or be a teacher to provide those, like a different viewpoint for students, to see somebody who has their similar background as a teacher, because I didn't have nobody, not until college, to have a teacher who was Latino. So all of my teachers were white. And so, again, just being able to see somebody in that position to say like, oh, that's something that I can do. I never had that. So I wanted to be able to be that for other students. But just through the course of life, I ended up getting into social work, which I love because it is more kind of aligned with how I see the world and how I want to, connect with individuals and communities and families. And so it has been really great.
One of the things that interests me about your story is really how you saw firsthand what a system experience was, and then you wanted to be involved in potentially changing it through furthering your education. How long were you working in the school system? Not
that long, I would say, I think 3 years, probably, or 4 years, but not that long at all. It's just, again, getting frustrated with systemic issues, and then even going further back, because the experience that lots of children of immigrants have is that you end up serving as a translator, interpreter for your parents. So seeing and experiencing how different systems treated my mom, trying to access certain systems, and those made me realize that, people are being treated differently or she's being treated differently because she doesn't speak English or because she's Mexican. So at a very young age, I started to notice, a lot of the things that we're being taught in school about the land of equality and all of these things doesn't necessarily play out in the real life. So that kind of opened my eyes at a very young age to like, okay, things are not great, and we need to. And I don't think people realize that if you don't have those experiences, people don't realize how those experiences affect others, right? And so, I've always, I think because of that, it's shaped me to think about these like bigger macro issues in ways that I think many, especially social workers, may not be thinking about that, unfortunately. I think that, being involved and being impacted by systems and how they can negatively affect your life and your trajectory and your ability to access resources and education and those types of things made me think I wanted to be involved in more systemic change and support efforts to do that.
I giggled a little bit. I don't think the recording picked it up, but it was because I remembered before I went back from my MSW, I was working in a police department in Longmont, Colorado. I was running a restorative justice program there. And sometimes the kiddos, there was mostly kiddos in the program, were sent there to complete like probation requirements. And I remember there's a large Hispanic community there. And I remember my Spanish is not good, but I know my numbers. And there was a kiddo translating for his mother how many hours of community service he needed to do. But he was telling her a different number than I had said to him. And I knew just enough to say, un momento.
It can go the other way too, right? Where you don't tell your parents the whole story about when you're in trouble, right? That everything that's happening. So
yeah, exactly. But I love that community. I still do. That's funny that you mentioned that. The other thing that you said that really struck me is like you experienced within your upbringing, some folks in the school system that were champions, and you wanted to become one of those champions, right? And we see a lot of social work students pursue social work for this reason, right? They've come through a lot of trauma or adversity, or their family's been in the system. That's true for myself as well. And they want to be, right that, right? It's not very simple. Maybe when we're younger, at least for me, it seems simpler than it actually is.
Yes, we're going to change the world, right?
Yes. So a social work degree can be one really helpful tool to making that happen. But you mentioned social workers learning to think about systems and at the macro level, right? And maybe that's not happening as much as it should. What can we do in social work education to address that?
I think that's a challenge, right? Because I think we've had a big shift in social work education and social work practice, I think probably since the 1980s, where we've become much more focused on the individual and on individual issues and, working with individuals and providing therapy, which is great and is needed. But I think it's come at a cost of focusing on the bigger picture issues, the macro issues, the systemic issues, because you can keep working with people individually, but you can't work with everybody. There's just not enough social workers and not enough time to work with everybody individually. So you need to do both, right? But we've shifted so far to focus on the individual only that I think to the detriment of not just our profession, but I think of society as well, right? Because if you think about historically, if you think about our big social welfare programs, which none of them are perfect, granted, but Social Security, the Fair Labor Standards Act, Medicare, Medicaid, social workers were heavily involved in the design of all of those programs. And I think they work better than a lot of things that have come post social workers being involved in the development of social programs. So I think for social work education, it's hard because a lot of students come into social work because they want to be clinicians, therapists, to direct practice. They don't, even though they might be interested in like macro issues, being involved in kind of systems change or policy change is not something that necessarily interests them. So do you say, this is what we're going to offer, and then you have a decreased number of students who want to become social workers because you're not focusing on therapy and clinical skills? Or do you find some way to kind of capture those students and get them to see, even though you want to be a therapist or clinician, this is why these things are important, and this is why you should care about them because they're going to impact the people you work with on a day-to-day basis. And, I get criticized often for saying this, but you're not going to deep breathe your way out of poverty or racism. You need to do macro picture things in order to address these issues. So in social work education, we have to find a way to bridge that divide. And I don't have the magic answers to that, but I know that we can't lose sight of it. Because it's easy to just, which I fear, a lot of schools of social work just provide lip service to the macro piece because you have to for reaffirmation, but don't actually intentionally incorporate it into the education of students. So I think it's really important for social work education to authentically incorporate these macro issues and systemic change efforts into social work education. And I know for a lot of people that's somehow controversial, and I'm not really sure why. Because if you think about direct practice and you're working with individuals and you want to be a therapist, right? You talk to the individual, you do an assessment, you come up with goals, and you develop a treatment plan on these are the things in order to address these issues that you're experiencing. We're going to work on these things and implement these changes, and this is the outcome that we hope to have. If you think about that on a macro level, it should be the same thing, right? We're assessing the situation, we're developing strategies to address the issues that we've identified at the macro level, and we implement policies and procedures or systemic changes to address those and improve those issues. You're just doing like a macro level treatment plan, but for some reason people think of that as, that's somehow you're kind of changing America as we know it, and somehow that's bad, even though we have identified these issues that we want to improve. And, I don't think that social work education takes that step to, I think we do a good job of identifying issues. We don't do a good job of figuring out, what can we do about them? And as social workers, what is our role in addressing some of these issues? So I think as educators, we need to really care about it and make sure that it's an authentic piece of the curriculum and not just something that we check the box off for reaffirmation or whatever. So
Some of this for me comes from a time in social work education where we're having students choose between micro and macro level practice. I'm sure there's still some of that, but it seems like at least increasingly we're recognizing the students need both. Many of those students who do go into direct clinical work will ultimately also be, serving the committee or involved in system leadership, and so they need those skills and that knowledge. But one could also argue they need it earlier in their clinical jobs, right? That you can do system change work and clinical roles and should be doing if you're a social worker. Right,
because we can see that they're probably going to need these skills because social workers, especially when you get an MSW, right, you get, you're encouraged to get into these leadership roles, and you often don't have the skills because your training was so focused on like clinical skills and direct practice skills that you don't have the administrative skills or the systems change skills. And so while we might recognize that they probably need it early on as students, a lot of them are very steadfast in no, I want more clinical skills. Why do I have to take this policy class? That's not what I want to do. So it's hard. And I teach social policy classes and I love it because to me, it's great when I can see, the aha moments when they're like, oh, now I understand why this matters. So, I think that, like I said, I think you're right, that I think that students need to have it early on and not just, don't wait till you get to your master's program, like very early on in the bachelor's program. We need to talk about why these things matter, because even when students go from their bachelor's of social work to their master's of social work, a lot of times they will say, okay, that was kind of my bachelor's level thing. I don't want to talk about this anymore, right? I want these advanced clinical skills. That's not why I'm getting my master's degree. Like, I've done this already. Or I hear students talk about that a lot. We've already talked about this. Why do we have to keep talking about that? And I tell them it's because it's important, right? The example that I use as I tell them, medical students, I'm sure they took lots of biology classes and they don't complain that they're talking about this again because it's important, right? You want to have a deep set of knowledge and skills when you graduate. And so, you're going to keep emphasizing these things that even though you think aren't important, in the long run, you'll see how they're important. Well, and one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we connect the dots for students, because sometimes I think that we throw a lot of different things at them without actually connecting the dots and saying, this is why all of these things matter, and this is how these pieces impact each other, and kind of your role in that process.
So we need to better integrate these subjects. Or, one thing that I'm imagining in my mind, because I'm pretty solution oriented myself, is like a culminating experience where students really have to pull together, including macro skills into their work, right? It's not just kind of a class they took that may or may not be useful. Or as you said, I think we do a good job of teaching students about system issues or how maybe systems are affecting clients, as part of their background, but not necessarily like, what do we do about these system issues, even when we're clinicians or in other direct practice roles? What does that look like out in the field?
Right, because it's hard, right? And it's easy. I shouldn't say it's easy, but I think it's more like self-rewarding when you're working with individuals or families. You can see I'm working with this specific individual or family and they have an issue and I'm helping them through it. And so there's a personal reward at the end because I'm seeing the change and then my role in that. When you talk about systems issues, it's so large and things can take so long to make any kind of change systemically or in society that I think students get fear that it's just going to be a losing battle. And then also, if you just look up, social work jobs, the clinician, therapist, all of that's what's going to pop up. You can't type in macro social worker and see there's not going to be a job like that. So students see that and they're like, well, I don't want to do that because I'm not going to have a job. And so again, like teaching students that there are opportunities to be involved in the macro level. And again, like you said, integrating all of these things together so that students have a different skill set or a variety of skills that they have when they graduate, that they can shift into these different roles. Because one of the great things about an MSW degree is that it's so flexible. You can do so many different things with the MSW degree by the nature of the degree itself, but maybe everybody's education and training is going to be different. And so I think for our School of Social Work is important that we make sure that students have all the skills that they need to transition into the different roles that they may have post-graduation. But what's still like really emphasizing, even if you're going to be a clinician, how the macro issues impact you and the people that you work with, and then how you can be involved in those, even though you're a clinician, right? Don't forget that it's still part of our mission to be involved in these things.
Thanks for sharing your perspective on that. I think we share some viewpoint there. I am a clinician still. I think one of the greatest things that I bring as a clinician is seeing firsthand thematic experiences in the client populations I work with. That knowledge is so important at the policy and program level, right? So a lot of our clinicians, could continue to see clients and families individually, but also be involved, right? And in making changes based on that, that expertise, if you would use that word, about what these populations are experiencing. So,
and I think that you bring up a good point. Like you as an individual, and there are individual clinicians that, I'm not saying that nobody does it, but it's done as a very individual level. I don't think as a profession we facilitate ways for clinicians to do those types of things and to be involved in those, larger systems change efforts. People do it because they're interested in it at the individual level, but in social work education and as a profession, I don't think we do a good job of creating those opportunities or facilitating clinicians who want to do that to be able to do that in a kind of a network that supports that as a whole profession, not just as individual social workers.
Some of that happens in field, right? In my current role, I don't do much with field, but it's so important and powerful in our education programs. And I remember like some of the field evaluation tools at other institutions where there's a question about, how did this field placement teach you about policy or get you involved in making change at the meso or macro level, right? And a lot of the field folks would sort of check off, it didn't happen here, right? Like this just wasn't an opportunity at this placement, right? So, maybe some of that change happens at the field level or out in the communities, not necessarily like amongst faculty and staff, but out in the communities where there's supervisors who could be thinking about how to bring that in, because there are rewarding experiences. I mean, I've also seen the opposite where there's students getting involved on DEI committees and on, system change kind of work at the committee and service level, really having a rewarding experience.
Yes, and I was fortunate when I first started my first social work position. My supervisor recognized, I was originally doing more direct practice working with adolescent, mostly Latino students and their families around mental health issues, and then kind of navigating the school systems. But my supervisor realized that I would bring up a lot of like systems issues to her about when I would work with families. And so she realized that maybe my interests lay in more like macro change. So she basically shifted my position to be more like macro administrative focus. And so it gave me an opportunity to be involved with the state kind of board of health services, or I forget exactly what it's called. And then going to meetings with the state legislature and those types of things where you're involved in like systems changes and policy decisions and things that so at the time, I don't know how the systems are set up here in Idaho, but in Arizona, you have regional behavioral health authorities that are tasked with different regions of the state. So at the time, the REBA for the kind of the Phoenix metropolitan area was going to do a survey about, how to improve services and what are the issues facing the families. And I had just started, and they were talking about it. They were reviewing the survey, and I just asked a question if they were going to do the survey and the interviews, because they were going to do both. It was going to be a qualitative, quantitative study. If they were going to do it in Spanish, and they said, "Oh, we didn't even think about that." And to me, Arizona has such a large Latino population that you would like. How do you not think about those kind of things? So, again, just being able to be involved in those kind of meetings and those processes, again, opened my eyes to there has to be how do you not see what is clearly it's like such a striking, glaring weakness in your approach. You're going to miss out on so many families and their perspective because you are not including them in your design. So that's kind of what got me interested in going on to get my PhD, because I thought, okay, there has to be other ways to approach these issues that we're tackling. And again, having kind of diverse perspectives and voices and at these tables when people are making these decisions is really important, because again, and I'm guilty of this also, you're coming in it with your own perspective, and sometimes you don't realize what you're missing because that's not your perspective. So it's really important to have as many people involved in these processes so that you can, capture everybody's perspective as much as possible, and you're not excluding people unintentionally. So
we've only gotten through the first question.
Sorry.
No, that's really good. Well, and really you've shared some about your practice and research interests. How else would you capture your practice and research interests?
So my research focuses primarily, especially over the past, I don't even know, maybe 10 years, focuses on more on the impact of our immigration policies on primarily Latino immigrants in the United States. So again, based off of my own personal experience, growing up being a child of immigrant, growing up, basically everybody that I knew was either an immigrant themselves or children of immigrants, and that experience and how that has shaped me. And then just moving to Arizona and then seeing the policies that emerge from Arizona, and how intentionally cruel and punishing they are. And again, not just Arizona, but that's kind of what started to, the evolution of my research was in Arizona, but of course there are national policies that are just as bad. So that has been my focus of my research, just looking at how in different aspects of our immigration policies, the impact on the impact on the individual themselves, the impact on the family, and then different kinds of impact, right? So mental health impact, emotional impact, financial impact. So looking at all of those things, again, because as much as we try to demonize this population, they're part of our community, and they're essential to our communities, and so it's important that we understand the issues that are impacting them, so that we can develop more humane policies to support families instead of punishing families all the time. So that's how kind of the evolution of my research and what my research focuses on.
How does that translate to Idaho then? As you mentioned, some of these problematic policies are national level,
Yes.
of course, but thinking specifically about Idaho and about the communities and populations that our programs serve, and our online programs also serve many of the surrounding states as well. How does that connect here?
Well, Idaho has a growing Latino population. There's a lot of agriculture, and so as a result, you have a lot of immigrants who, move to the region for, agriculture and different industries. And so, for me, I think it's important that everybody's going to have a different immigrant experience. And so, my experience is specific to being, Mexican, of Mexican descent, and that's going to be different than somebody who is the Puerto Rican or Dominican or on the East Coast. It's going to be a totally different experience. So it's important to, here in Idaho, to meet with community members and understand the issues that are impacting people here, specifically in Idaho, and why they may be similar to experiences that I've encountered in my own personal life, and then just through my research. You can't just assume that it's going to be the same here. So it's important to connect with communities. It's important to understand the issues that are affecting them. And it's important for us in the School of Social Work to have our students understand the populations that they're going to be working with. And so I don't know at this point how much our curriculum does that, and how much we focus on the populations here in Idaho, specifically rural populations or Latino populations, but we need to, because those are the populations that, if you look at the university strategic plan and goals, specific populations that we need to make better outreach to and make sure that we support. And so I think that, looking at the populations here, it's an increasingly diverse population, even though it's still overwhelmingly white in Idaho. Diversity is growing, and so it's important that people recognize that, and also understand that we need to serve all of Idaho, not just what has traditionally been the populations that we serve. And so we need to understand what the issues are in order to better meet their needs, not just in the community, but here in the school as well.
From my limited understanding, we have a large and growing population of Latina, especially adolescents, I think, in Idaho. And I've done a little bit of work out in some of the communities outside of Boise. I don't know, are there scholars here that you'll work with in order to study those populations?
I've been told of different people that I should connect with, but I haven't made those connections yet. But yes, I'm definitely excited about the opportunities to work with the populations here and get a better sense of kind of what are the issues here and how we can better support those populations. So yeah, one of the things that is always interesting is just figuring out, who are the people to connect with, but also who are the right people to connect with, right? Because sometimes people who have been in communities for a long time, those may not be the best people to connect with because they sometimes have come at it in a way that they are not seeing the new issues that are coming up because they've been involved in the process so long that they've been doing a certain way all the time. So again, just figuring out ways to connect with people that we can kind of develop a network to support the populations here in Idaho. So.
Great. Sounds like, at least to some degree, teaching our students research ethics and modeling that in our work. I know that sometimes damage has been done to these communities through research and through social work practice, despite sometimes the best of intentions, right?
Yes. But even not sometimes intentionally harmful, but yes.
Yeah, fair. But one way I know of in order to start to build that capacity and that work is through having students with lived experience and with identities that represent those communities, Latinas being one, but also, Native reservations, aging populations, rural areas with limited access for any number of reasons. So we need to continue to diversify our student populations.
Yes.
And I know that you've mentioned that is one of your goals, to sort of build diversity amongst our students and create opportunities and access for those students. What are some steps that you have planned for pursuing that goal?
Well, can we backtrack a little bit because something that you mentioned, right, as the kind of intersectionality of different identities and like the ever evolving nature of those intersecting identities, I think that it's difficult because as the challenge, I should say, for social work education is to keep making sure that our curriculum is current, right? That we understand that that we have an increased number of different populations and diverse populations from a variety of defining diversity in a kind of broad sense, and we shouldn't just have a very kind of generic and bland curriculum, and it needs to be dynamic and evolving. Otherwise, which kind of leads into the next question, right? Otherwise, I don't think that it serves anybody any good to recruit people from diverse populations to come and get their bachelor's in social work or their master's in social work, and they see themselves not reflected in the curriculum or their issues not reflected or addressed in the curriculum. So I think we need to do multiple things, right? I think that we need to look internally first and figure out, like for our current students or recent graduates, what are the things that we need to do better, right? So talk to them and say, what can we do better as a school to support you to make sure that you're successful, or what didn't we do? Where are we failing or lacking? So that way, when you go out and you talk to new community members or go to the community college and recruit students, you're not just bringing people into a situation that isn't going to be welcoming or supportive. You're going to be already trying to identify and then address those issues because you've done that kind of pre-work. Because I think you're doing more harm by recruiting diverse students to come to take classes here in an environment that may not be supportive for them, and then what damage do you cause, because then they're going to maybe be turned off by higher education completely. And so we need to look inward and figure out, again, by talking to current maybe and recent graduates about what we can do better to support them, and basically if they could design support systems or structures, how would they do it, and then start implementing those so that way then we can go out to communities and say, look, if these are the things that if you come here, we're going to have these supports for you, because it's hard for people who, first generation students, rural students, students from diverse backgrounds of identities to come to university. And I don't think people really realize how alienating it can be to come to leave your community, which is your safe space usually, and to come to the university. It's jarring, even for me at this stage, to move from a community that I'm used to a brand new community here in Boise. Even though everybody has been very nice, it's still something that you'd notice immediately that you are different. And so can we build support systems for students from diverse populations so that they can feel like this is a more welcoming environment? Because often what happens is we expect students to navigate kind of existing systems and then provide them with some support, but basically the system or the structure is what it is, and we'll help you navigate it, but we're not really going to do anything to really alter it, because it is what it is. And I don't think that needs to be that way. I think that we can provide systems that can start to think of things differently, right? Because, if you think about communities or populations that have more collectivist viewpoints, coming to the university is a very individual process. And so that's not something that's very comfortable for students that come from, more collectivist identities and backgrounds and cultures. And so can we build a system where people feel connected? And that's the challenge. I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but I think that we need to do really look internally to figure out what can we do better to support students, so that way when people come, you can recruit them and say, we have all these supports for you to help you to be successful, not just come so we can increase the numbers of diverse students and yay for us and pat ourselves on the back that way. I think we really need to be intentional about providing the supports for students so they can be successful. Otherwise, I think we all fail if we don't do that.
In a lot of ways, it seems like, we're talking about creating system change in our education structure, in our higher education structure, and social work education, in a way that we want change to occur in other systems. I mean, so it's there's outward work, connecting with communities, learning from communities, and learning about their experiences and their needs and their barriers, but also deeply personal and interpersonal work too, to reflect on where are we at and what do we need in order to be effective in that work, and have it be sustainable, not performative, right. Not just about numbers, but about people's lived experiences of our programs in school.
Right, and it's not just incumbent on the School of Social Work. It needs to be supported by the university as well, because we can't do it alone, because the students aren't just going to interact with the School of Social Work, they're going to interact with the whole university. So while we can start and do our part, it still needs to be part of a broader systems change to support students, and I'm hoping that is what happens.
All right, let's shift a bit, if we can, to talking about leadership. So you've talked about your research experience and interests. You've talked about how you came into social work from kind of a practice interest in the schools and in immigration. But in terms of leadership, what draws you to be a leader in this work, and what are you bringing into leadership?
That's a good question, because if you would have asked me when I started my academic career that I was going to eventually be a divisional dean of the School of Social Work, I would have said you're crazy, because that was never anything that was of remote interest to me. I just wanted to, teach and do my research, and those are the only things that I wanted to focus on. But I was really fortunate of having really good directors in my career who gave me different opportunities to be involved in kind of different leadership roles along the way, eventually becoming the associate director of the School of Social Work at Arizona State. And that opened my eyes to different ways of thinking, right? That because before, it's easy to, as a faculty member, right, you can complain about the way things are and why aren't we doing this and why aren't we doing that? Or we can be involved in trying to, make the change happen. And so I thought it was time to put up or shut up kind of way. And so, I really like working in teams. And what I enjoy a lot is kind of bringing people together to address issues or to, we have a goal in mind and we're going to work together to accomplish this goal. And so being in leadership positions, that's how I see things, right? I don't see myself as, I'm by myself going to lead us to the promised land. It's like, what can I do to facilitate, bring us together to accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish as a school? And so that's my approach to leadership, is to think about it in a collective way. And yes, I know ultimately the decisions are going to be mine, but I'm going to do them with the input of the faculty and the students and the staff and everybody, because I think that's the best way to approach things, is to kind of take everybody's viewpoint into consideration and to see ourselves as we're all working on this together, and that we're all essential pieces to this larger machine, puzzle, however you want to describe it. Because oftentimes people get divided into camps, like, these are the staff and this is the faculty and these are the students, and yes, we have some connection, or we kind of see ourselves as kind of loosely aligned in the school of social work, but no, we're all essential pieces and we can't function without each other. So how can we bring everybody together to accomplish these goals? And that's the way I approach things. And I think that leadership is really important, because if you have a bad leader, things can go horrible, right? But I used to tell faculty members all the time, and that, directors come and go, right? The faculty members are the ones that set the tone for the way that the school is going to function long term, because they're the ones that usually are there the longest. And so if you have a strong faculty, then you can overcome a bad leader. But if you have a really good leader and working with the faculty, I think that creates such a dynamic energy that you can accomplish a lot of things. And so I think that in the things that I've learned over the different leadership experiences that I've had, have just helped me to really appreciate the expertise and the experience that people have, and to value everybody's knowledge and viewpoints and perspectives. And we might not always agree, but we have to understand that we're need to work on these things together. And being even the term leader makes me a little bit uncomfortable with being in the position that I am. I just feel that my goal is to make us all seem like we're one school, even though we have different components to it. And it's harder and harder because, we have, here at Boise State, we have program in Coeur d'Alene and a program in Twin Falls and an online program and a face-to-face program and a VSW program and an MSW program. And we're not even housed in the same buildings. And so I think by that nature, we feel separated and disconnected. But we need to, I think my role is to try to figure out how we can start seeing ourselves as one school that has different components to it, and that we're all essential to making the students have successful outcomes, and then ultimately our communities have improve our communities.
So you've talked about getting communities involved and learning from communities around Idaho, just as one example about what we need to be doing as a school and how to improve, and also, creating dialogue and more cohesion within the school in order for us to be effective. So in this way, you're really, as a leader, modeling value for voice and hearing perspectives. So I appreciate that. Are there other kind of steps that you have planned in order to approach your leadership goals?
Well, the biggest thing, similar to what I mentioned before, is just listening to people, right? And talking to faculty, staff, students about, what they see are the issues, the strengths in the school of social work. And then for community members, also how do you perceive Boise State University? Talking to students at community colleges, what are the challenges of, we know in general the challenges, right? But what specific challenges do you face in transitioning from community college to Boise State? So again, just trying to get a sense of the issues and needs in the community, and then working collectively to try to figure out ways to address them. So again, my approach is just trying to talk to as many people as possible to get a sense of what the issues are And again, not that I have all of the answers, but so listening to everybody, or as many people as possible, I think is important because it's easy to assume in academia, or you look at studies, and yes, it's important to do that, but sometimes you just need to talk to the people in your actual community to hear what the issues are. So I think that in my role is to make as many connections as possible and to see, when I was looking at a lot of the material for Boise State and then the school social work, it's very much about, I'm not saying it's wrong, right? But it's very much about focused on what happens in the university. And for me, what I like to think about is how is the university and how is the school social work connected to the community? And how can we kind of bridge that gap and divide, especially for populations who don't traditionally access the university or view the university as, something that is attainable or something that they feel connected to at all. So one example that I have is, my grandfather, before he passed away, he visited me when I was at Arizona State, and I took him to our building, and he was really nervous just to get into the building. He was afraid that he was going to get in trouble for being on campus. And he kept saying, I'm not supposed to be here, or, I'm not supposed to be here. And I kept telling him, no, it's okay. Like, you can be, you can be here. And so I don't think that people realize how people don't feel connected to the university or see it as something so foreign because it's not something that they've grown up with. And so being able to kind of bridge those divides. And so I think that we need to be more outward focused and not, again, while not losing sight of the things that we need to fix and address internally, but social workers especially, we're going to be working in community. So how can we build those connections, and not just through we have to build these connections because we need practicum sites, but because we're building connections with communities, not just community agencies.
Absolutely. It sounds like, at least in some way, like building some structure for communities to have voice and to feel like our school and our programs are accessible, and the university as a whole, right? Like maybe community advisory groups. Yes. Or research is some of it too, mm-hmm. Right? How do we engage folks who would then feel like we're more accessible?
Right.
Yeah. And I think, from my experience of some of our online MSW online students, there are a number of strengths in how they are able to access that particular program too. So hearing from people about what's going well and what the strengths are and how to maintain those, right? Mm-hmm. While making the changes that we also need to make. What excites you about preparing for the next generation? Preparing the next generation of social workers.
I think the next generation of social workers is what excites me. The generation when I grew up, even though it's just the generation now just has so much energy around, social change and social justice, and that to me that's exciting. And so how can we, what excites me is their enthusiasm for those issues and how to address those issues. So how can we as a school capture that energy so that way they don't lose it, and that way they can continue to work with communities or work with individuals to kind of address a lot of our social issues. So to me that's exciting, right? To how can we we have certain knowledge and expertise, and they have experiences and knowledge that is totally or maybe totally different than ours. And how can we collectively come up with strategies and interventions to address a lot of the issues that are facing society? Mm-hmm. So to me, that's really exciting because that's why I love teaching, because the students have such great energy, and I'm constantly learning new things about them. And since they're more connected to, on the ground issues because they're out in the communities and doing, working in agencies, and they can see firsthand the issues. To me, that's what excites me as an instructor, is just to kind of get that. And so, yeah, to me, that's what's exciting. The new generation is what is exciting to me. So for social work education, I think the challenge is, like I mentioned before, how do we adapt quickly given the slow process that change happens within educational systems. Like basically, how do we keep up, right? How do we keep up with the diversity changes in the country, with the like issues that are happening in the country, so that again our curriculum reflects those changes and those issues in a way that prepares students to then work in those communities to address those issues and promote change. So to me, like while it's a challenge, it is exciting, right? That there are these opportunities, and I don't think that the way that the structure for social work is set up, where we have to wait, or we don't have to wait, but we often wait for reaffirmation to make curriculum changes because that's when it needs to happen. I think that we need to be more proactive and say, we need to do these things because they're going to be for the benefit of our students and our communities, not just because our accrediting body says we need to change X. So to me, it's exciting to be a part of the educational system where you can, implement these changes and again, like harness that enthusiasm. It's hard to, because I know it seems cheesy, but they're just so. It's so great to work with students because they just bring so much energy and passion to these issues. And so, as an educator, as a leader, like how do we harness that? How do we kind of basically keep up with the times in our curriculum to make sure that our curriculum reflects this kind of society, and that they're better prepared to work with different populations and different issues that maybe previous generations of social workers didn't have to, or maybe even though they should have, didn't. So
yeah. You talk about keeping up, but really we want to be a leader, right? We want to be like ahead.
Right. Yeah, that would be ideal. But it does feel like a little bit like we're always a little bit behind. But yes, ideally we would say this is what we see these things as priorities, and again set the priorities ourselves, not just because CSWE said this is what you need to focus on. Right. I think as a school, this is our identity as a school. What is our identity? And like attract students that way. Right. This is what we're going to be focused on. This is what the skill set you're going to come out of. And it's not just going to be like these generic skills, which, yes, you need some skills that are kind of across the board types of things. But this is not just going to be a generic program, right? This is going to be a program that you're going to come out with these skill sets that other programs may not offer, right? So I think that to me, that's exciting.
That's great. I mean, I think that's what I love about working with students too. And if you take a relational approach and you're really listening to your students, they're teaching you as much as you're teaching them, right? You're teaching them social work. They're teaching you about, what's happening in our communities and what's happening in the world and their generations. And, there's so much diversity in some ways amongst our students, age diversity and geographical diversity and, different life experiences, and you're learning from them. But even that life experience is changing so quickly, right? What I learned from my students about their life experience 5 years ago is completely different now because of what we've all been through together, but also differently. We've experienced it differently, right?
Together, separately, differently.
Yeah. So it's a lot of trying to keep up for me as well. Yes. I was hoping you maybe had a secret.
I don't have a secret. But again, I think it goes back to what I had mentioned before, is listening. Right. We just assume a lot when we come up with courses or curricula, and we need to listen. And I don't think that we do that enough.
Do you have any specific advice for students and or faculty who are at early stages of their social work career, keeping in mind that many of our students and faculty come to this work for similar reasons that you did, wanting to make changes to things that they've experienced in their lives, right? Sort of what are the next steps besides being here and getting a social work degree at Boise State?
I think keeping an open mind to the opportunities and possibilities, because again, I never would have pictured myself being in the position that I am. And students, graduates, they're going to have so many different opportunities because there's such a need for social workers, for people involved in the work that we do, that they're going to have numerous opportunities, and to not be afraid to take advantage of those opportunities, because sometimes we get, if you come in mind like, yes, I want to be a clinician, and that's great. If that's what you do your whole life, wonderful. But there's going to be lots of opportunities to do other things. And so, don't shut yourself off from those opportunities and try them, because maybe you might love them or you might not, and you're never going to know unless you try. So, that would be my suggestion for students, for faculty, similar, right? Again, I never thought I would be in this role. So again, take advantage of the opportunities that you have. Also, think about yourself as part of a larger system and your role and what you want your role to be in that system, in, pushing for, promoting positive change. It's easy as faculty members, you teach your class or your classes, and you do your research if that's part of your, in your portfolio. It's easy to just keep doing the same thing over and over again. But if I think it's important to see yourself as kind of a larger part of a larger system that, and what can you do to improve it? And again, listening to students, because often as we move on in our careers, we've done things a certain way for a long time, and maybe it worked before, but the populations are different, the issues students are facing are different. So again, have an open mind, right? Because it's different now, right? Post-pandemic, we have to be open to things that we might have thought about before. Before, I would have never thought we need to make sure or have an opportunity for students to join us through Zoom if they can't or are sick or those kind of things. It was just, you missed class. Oh well, like that's it. So you constantly have to adapt to different things. And one of the things that has helped me, and I encourage faculty members, like we talked about before, is to build like a sense of collective identity and working together. I know that when you're doing research a lot of times it's very individual and isolating. But I don't like doing that. I like working in collective research teams. And so finding out ways to connect with people who share your interest, I think will be helpful and make you feel like kind of the work that you do more fulfilling. I think that, building these like sub collectives within the larger collectives, I think is helpful because, sorry.
For our listeners, David keeps putting his hands on the table.
Sorry. Yes, I talk with my hands a lot. So I think that's important. I think that I've grown a lot because of the mentors that I had. I've been fortunate to have great mentors, and so remember how you got to be here and help the people who are coming up behind you or after you, however you want to define it. And if you had a bad experience, help the people that come after you to have a better experience. And if you had a great experience, use that experience as a model that you can mentor, newer faculty members. And so, again, I think we're all in this together, and we need to figure out ways that we can support each other, because it's tough. We have these internal demands and external pressures, and we need to figure out ways to support each other as faculty, as staff, as students. I think it's really important.
So that sort of brings me to one of my last questions, which is one area we focus on in social work education is self-care. We have assignments and dialogues with students in order to support their use of self-care while they're in their program and prepare for the realities of the workforce, which is that most social work jobs are very demanding and busy and exhausting emotionally, if not otherwise. So we talk about self-care strategies. You're also describing community care, how we care for each other and support each other. What are your views on self-care, and what do you do for self-care, for fun and relaxation?
Well, that's, I think, you're right. We talk about it a lot in our courses, and I think it's important, right? It's like what you mentioned, social work jobs are very stressful. It's easy to get overwhelmed because our systems don't support, we don't have enough social workers to support the populations that need us. And so it's easy to get overwhelmed. So I think it's important to do whatever is helpful for you. But this idea of like self-care, if you think about populations that are more collectivist in nature, the idea of like self-care is maybe different, because it's not really self-care, it's like family care or community care. And so, but we don't really talk about that when we talk in our classes or in our curriculum. It's just the self, which is a very American, westernized way of thinking about it, is me as an individual. How can I feel better. And so I would encourage us to think about how can we think about it in a more, again, collective, because like just for me personally, thinking about like self-care, while I understand it's important and people like to do certain things to take care of themselves, often it feels like very selfish because that's not how culturally we're raised to think about yourself as an individual. You're part of a family, you're part of a community. And so thinking about, I'm going to do this, take an hour, 30 minutes to meditate or to take a walk, or it's not something that culturally matches. And so I think it's important to think about that when we're teaching students or thinking about that in class, that it's not always going to look the same for everybody. And so, again, while I understand the importance of it, everybody's going to approach it a little bit differently. And some people might want to take a hike or a walk or, meditate or those kind of things. But for many people, it's not possible because their family or time constraints. And other time, maybe culturally, it's not relevant or fits with their cultural experience and upbringing. So, I think we need to find ways that we can help cope with the stress that we're facing. But the idea of only focusing on the self may not always be the best approach. But I know that that's mostly how we teach it and how we practice it in social work. But I would challenge us to think about it in a slightly different context. I attended a workshop yesterday, and they talked about, and I thought it was great how they talked about, we often talk about compassion fatigue, but it's not really compassion fatigue that we have oppression fatigue. And so when people are constantly either experiencing oppression or encountering people as social workers who are dealing with oppression themselves, that's the fatigue that we feel. It's not really compassion fatigue. We're fatigued because we're encountering so much oppression in society. So, again, while for some people the individual work might be helpful, for others it just might not look the same way. And so maybe think about it a little bit differently than we traditionally think about it in our social work classes.
I worked with a few students in the spring to do a self and community care survey, and students shared that they make some efforts to do self-care but had struggled to identify how they connect to community in a way that's healthy for them, that they have time for, that's sustainable. So we need to kind of support that development. But something I also think about is like organizational care and how we kind of demand the self to take care of yourself when things are not set up, to, or maybe even organizations and systems are set up to, place that responsibility on you, but they're creating circumstances where you need to do more and more of it, right? So yes. It's not a good big picture, to get back to your points about social justice. It's not a good meso or macro approach to solving problems.
We say self-care is important, but like you just said, a lot of our social systems or agencies or organizations don't allow that to happen. It's basically, you need to practice self-care in the little bit of time you have left in your day after a very stressful work day and your family and everything else. Yeah. And is that doable? I don't know. Maybe not. So yeah, we need to figure out ways to incorporate kind of more supportive systems or more supportive work environments so that people don't feel so overwhelmed in the first place.
Yeah, and that's hard work to do, right? Given the demands on our systems and the realities of the workforce. Right. I've heard people give like funny examples, like in the education system of like teachers being asked to stay an hour late on their jobs in order to attend a self-care workshop, but they're missing time with their family, or maybe just time to sleep more or eat some healthy food because they're attending this self-care training, right? So sometimes like I think we're missing like the big picture of what are we working toward with some of these ideas in social work. So listening is part of that.
Because you asked, like, what do I do? And there isn't really anything I like to do by myself. I'm not an individual person. Everything, I like to be with my family. That's as long as I'm with my family, then I am happy. It doesn't really matter what we're doing. So like right now when I'm not with them, because we're all kind of spread out as we're transitioning to different stages in our lives, that's been a challenge. But that's the thing. So I don't really think about, I'm going to take a walk or I'm going to hike or anything or bike ride. It's whatever we do, I'd like to do it as a family.
I just drag my family on the hikes. You could ask any of my kids. Uphill both ways.
we do those things, but again, it's not. I never do it by myself.
Yeah. Any final thoughts or other ideas you want to share?
I'm just really excited to be here, and excited about the opportunities that this position affords, and just getting out there, like I mentioned, to the communities and getting a chance to meet everybody in the university committee, but in the larger Boise and Idaho communities in general, and the populations that we serve. I just, like we talked about, I think it's a really interesting time and very nerve-wracking time, but also exciting for the possibilities of change. And so I'm excited to be a part of helping shape the school and new generation of social work students. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great.
Thank you for listening to the Bronco Tales podcast. On next month's episode, Catherine Sheets and Jenny Alderden discuss AI in healthcare and how Jenny's research shows exciting new possibilities with this technology. Enjoy this preview, and we'll see you there.
AI is being used at all of the health centers in the Valley in the electronic health record. I think of AI as a co-pilot for nurses. And so we are the pilot, we're in charge, we decide where the plane goes, but AI can be a very useful co-pilot.